Stay here and clean the house, Mum, because this beach vacation is just for us, and the kids need space. I am Constance. I'm 71 years old, and I spent my entire life behind the lens of a camera as a studio photographer, capturing the flawless smiles of other people's families while holding my own together with tooth and nail. What my son forgot this morning, while he stuffed my life savings into his suitcase and discarded me like an old piece of furniture, is that the person who develops the photograph always holds the original negative in their hands. The dawn had started like any other day in my house, or at least in the house that had once belonged only to me. The kitchen clock barely read 5:30 in the morning when my bare feet touched the cold tile. At that hour, silence is usually a gift. A brief pause before the hurricane of daily coexistence wipes away the peace. But today wasn't just any day. Today was the day of the big family trip. I had spent weeks preparing everything, anticipating the heat of the sun on my tired joints, imagining the ocean breeze I hadn't felt in over a decade. I tied my apron around my waist, the same faded floral linen apron that has kept me company for years. My hands marked by the stains of developing chemicals from my youth, and the wrinkles of time began their automatic dance. I took out the flour, the eggs, the milk, and the butter. My grandkids, 7-year-old Hunter and 5-year-old Sophie, absolutely loved my pancakes, especially on holidays or travel days. It was a tradition I had established myself. While I whisked the batter in the glass bowl, the rhythmic sound of the metal against the glass served as my anchor. I was the grandmother who took care of things. That was my identity, my armour, and up until that moment, my greatest pride. Ever since Raymond, my ex-husband, packed his things 15 years ago and walked out chasing a younger illusion, my world had shrunk, and at the same time, concentrated entirely on my son, Harrison. The divorce didn't destroy me, but it hardened me in certain areas and softened me in others. I promised myself that my son would never lack the warmth of a home, that his father's absence would be compensated by double the presence from me. I worked double shifts at the photography studio, shooting weddings, baptisms, communions, always standing, always smiling behind the viewfinder, to pay for Harrison's college tuition, to make sure this big house with its high ceilings remained our sanctuary. And that sanctuary opened its doors wide open 5 years ago, when Harrison and his wife Lauren lost their apartment over a bad financial decision. They arrived with suitcases, cardboard boxes, and long faces, asking for asylum just for a few months until they could get back on their feet. Months turned into years. The boxes were unpacked, the guest room morphed into the kids' bedroom, and my living room became the territory of plastic toys and discarded shoes. I didn't complain. On the contrary, my mother's heart saw the opportunity to have my blood close by. I took over the grocery shopping because kids are terribly expensive. Then I started paying the water and power bills because Lauren just couldn't find the job she supposedly deserved. Little by little, my pension and the life savings from my entire working career merged into what Harrison called the family fund. The smell of vanilla and melting butter began to fill the kitchen. I poured the first ladle of batter onto the hot skillet. The hiss of the liquid hitting the iron brought me back to the present. Upstairs, on the second floor, I could hear hurried footsteps, the dull thud of suitcase wheels dragging across the hardwood floor. I had polished myself just last weekend. I could hear Lauren's high-pitched voice complaining that something wouldn't fit in her designer bag. A bag that, curiously enough, had appeared in the house right after I gave them cash for Hunter's back-to-school supplies. I stacked the golden pancakes on a large ceramic plate, covering them with a clean cloth to keep the heat locked in. I squeezed fresh oranges, feeling the acid bite into the tiny cuts on my fingers, the result of hours spent sewing the school costumes Lauren always forgot to order on time. I was the invisible safety net of this family, the one who made breakfast, the one who did the laundry, the one who bankrolled the whims disguised as necessities. The idea for the trip had come up 2 months ago. Harrison had come home practically vibrating with excitement, holding up his smartphone to show me pictures of a 5-star beach resort. Mom, we need a break. It's been a rough few years. The kids deserve to see the ocean. He said it with that smile he knew would melt my defences right down to the ground. He asked me to fund the adventure. You've got the studio savings, Mum. I run the banking app. Let me handle all the bookings so I can get you a better deal. You just have to authorise the transfer to the main account. And I, blinded by love and the dream of walking on the sand with my grandchildren, went to the bank, signed the paperwork, and moved a substantial sum into that account he managed from his phone, even though legally it remained under my name as the primary account holder. For weeks I prepared. I went to the mall and bought myself a modest swimsuit, a wide-brimmed hat to protect me from the sun, and a comfortable pair of sandals. I packed my things into a humble green canvas duffel bag that I tucked away quietly in the corner of my room, ready to stay out of the way, ready to be the grandmother who watches the kids in the pool while the parents relax. The footsteps approached the stairs. The kids ran into the kitchen, followed by Harrison, who was lugging 2 massive suitcases, sweating and scowling. "Pancakes!" Hunter yelled, climbing onto the chair and grabbing one with his dirty hands before I could even offer him a fork. "Careful, sweetheart, they're hot," I said softly, pouring him a glass of juice. Harrison dropped the suitcases in the hallway with a heavy thud that rattled the door frames. He was wearing a white linen shirt I had ironed the night before, making sure the collars were crisp and absolutely flawless. Behind him appeared Lauren, impeccably made up at 6 in the morning, scrolling through her phone without so much as a good morning. She sat at the table, pushed the plate of pancakes away with a gesture of pure disdain, and sighed. "Harrison, are you sure you packed my creams in the checked bag? I don't want security taking them at the airport," she said, completely ignoring my existence. "Yeah, babe, it's all in there," he replied, hastily pouring himself a cup of coffee and splashing a few drops right onto the clean tablecloth. I stepped up to the table, wiping my hands on my apron. I felt a flutter of anticipation in my stomach. "Well, I've got my green bag ready upstairs," I chimed in with a smile, trying to weave myself into the frantic morning energy. "Do you want me to bring it down now so we can load it in the trunk? I know the cab for the airport is getting here in 20 minutes. The silence that followed my words was so thick you could have carved it with a butter knife. Hunter stopped chewing. Sophie stared at me with her big brown eyes. Lauren looked up from her phone for the very first time that morning. She shot a rapid glance at Harrison, then looked back down, letting a tiny sharp smirk slip from the corner of her mouth. Almost imperceptible. Absolutely lethal. Harrison set his coffee mug down on the table. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous tic he'd had since he was a little boy, whenever he was about to lie or do something he knew he should be ashamed of. "Mum," he started, his voice adopting that slow, dragging tone, as if he were explaining things to someone who didn't speak the language. "There's been a change of plans." My smile froze, but it didn't vanish right away. Maternal instinct, that stubborn force that always tries to justify the child, scrambled to find a logical explanation. A change of plans? The flight got delayed. It didn't matter. Should I keep the pancakes warm a little longer? "No, the flight leaves at the same time," Harrison finally said, looking up. His eyes were cold, calculating, entirely stripped of the tenderness I had showered on him his entire life. "The change is about the tickets and the hotel." I took a step back, pressing my spine against the cool metal of the refrigerator. My breathing went a little shallow. "I don't understand, son." Harrison let out a heavy sigh of impatience, treating me like a bureaucratic roadblock in the middle of his perfect morning. "Look, the rooms at that resort are incredibly expensive, and the flights, well, with it being peak season, the prices just skyrocketed. I had to adjust the budget. And honestly, Mum, at your age, a trip like this is just too exhausting. The sun, the sand, walking around all day. You're going to get tired, and you're going to slow us down." The words floated in the kitchen air, tangling with the sweet smell of breakfast. I felt a dull, heavy blow to the centre of my chest, like the air had been violently punched out of my lungs by an invisible fist. "But I paid for that trip, Harrison." My voice came out low, perfectly steady. There was no anger yet, just a deep, endless ocean of confusion. "The money I transferred was for a family vacation." Lauren let out a short, dry, humourless laugh. "Oh, please, Constance," my daughter-in-law said, using my first name with that dripping condescension I had swallowed for years. "It's family money. And right now, the family is Harrison, the kids, and me. You already had your time to travel when you were young. We are the ones who need this break. Besides, somebody has to stay behind and watch the house." I looked at Harrison, waiting for him to correct her. Waiting for the boy whose scraped knees I used to bandage, the young man whose college tuition I paid by developing film into the dead of night, the man whose family I took in when they had nowhere else to go, to step up and defend his mother. But Harrison just shrugged his shoulders, giving a slight nod to his wife's words. "Lauren is right, Mum. Stay here and clean the house because this beach vacation is just for us and the kids need space. Take these days to rest. Oh, and don't forget the trash gets picked up tomorrow and the plants in the backyard need to be watered every afternoon." I didn't scream. No tears slid down my wrinkled cheeks. In that precise second, as I stared at the relaxed jaw of my son and the triumphant gleam in my daughter-in-law's eyes, something inside me simply switched off. And something else, something much older and much colder, clicked on. I had always been a woman of deep affections. I had loved my family with a devotion that bordered on absolute sacrifice. I had forgiven snubs I had ignored, minor disrespects I had, served hot meals and washed other people's dirty laundry in absolute silence, truly believing that unconditional love would eventually breed gratitude. But in that fraction of a second, I realised my fatal mistake. Unconditional love does not breed gratitude in selfish hearts. It breeds entitlement. It breeds the illusion that the person giving has no boundaries, has no self-worth, and most dangerous of all, has no power. My personality, forged in patience and constant caretaking, did not dissolve into hysterics. Like the good photographer I always was, I simply changed the focus. I adjusted the lens. I looked at the scene with clinical clarity, completely stripped of the foggy filter of blind motherhood. I stepped away from the refrigerator. My movements were slow, measured. I walked over to the sink, turned on the faucet, and washed my hands, scrubbing away every last trace of flour and butter. I shut the water off, grabbed a cotton towel, and dried my fingers. One by one, taking my time, forcing them to watch my silence. "I understand," I finally said. My voice sounded so eerily calm that even Harrison seemed thrown off balance for a second. They were expecting drama. They were expecting me to cry, to beg, to make them feel a fleeting sting of guilt that they would wash away with their first complimentary cocktail on the plane. I did not give them that pleasure. "You understand?" Harrison asked, raising an eyebrow, palpably relieved he didn't have to deal with an emotional scene. "That's great, Mom. I knew you'd be reasonable. It's for the best." Outside, the blare of the taxi's horn shattered the kitchen's tension. Lauren jumped up, brushing non-existent crumbs off her flawless skirt. "That's our ride. Kids, grab your backpacks. We are out of here." The chaos resumed. The children sprinted toward the front door. Harrison grabbed the heavy suitcases, wrestling a bit with the weight. I watched him walk down the hallway, dragging the plastic wheels across the wood I took such good care of. I watched him stop at the entrance. "Mum," he called out, without looking back, his voice rushing his mind already halfway to the airport. "I need to take the Platinum credit card. The one in your name." I linked it to the app, but sometimes the hotel asks for the physical plastic for the security deposit. You know how strict those luxury places are. I walked slowly down the hall. I went to the console table by the door, opened the drawer where I kept my documents and pulled out the credit card. The exact same card backed by the little capital I had left and the fully paid off mortgage of this very house. I held the piece of plastic between my fingers for a second. I could have said no. I could have thrown a massive fit right there in the doorway. But my strategic mind, the one that spent decades calculating the exact lighting to make a portrait perfect, was already operating 10 steps ahead of them. I handed him the card. "Take it," I said, looking him dead in the eye. This time he was the first to look away. "Thanks, Mum. We'll call you when we get there, if we get good signal on the beach. Don't tire yourself out too much with the cleaning." Lauren brushed past me, leaving a trail of expensive perfume without saying goodbye. The kids yelled a quick, "Bye, Grandma," from the back seat of the cab. Harrison climbed into the passenger seat and slammed the door shut. I stood on the threshold of my home, feeling the crisp morning air hit my face. I watched the vehicle pull away, kicking up a small cloud of dust on the quiet suburban street, until it turned the corner and vanished from sight. I didn't raise my hand to wave. I simply watched, like a sentry watching the enemy, voluntarily abandon the fortress. I turned around and went back inside. The house was swallowed by a sepulchral silence, a brutal contrast to the noise of the last 5 years. But it wasn't a peaceful silence. It was the silence of utter contempt. I walked slowly through the living room. They had left 3 half-drunk cups of coffee on my oak coffee table, leaving wet, dark rings on the wood. In the hallway, a pair of Hunter's muddy shoes lay abandoned right in the middle of the floor. I reached the kitchen. The plate of pancakes was still sitting there. Juice was spilled on the tablecloth. The dirty skillet sat on the stove. The mess they had ordered me to clean. The physical evidence of my status as the maid in my own home. I ran my fingertips along the edge of the table. The sadness, that crushing weight that had tried to suffocate me against the refrigerator, evaporated completely. In its place, it left a cold, razor-sharp, absolutely ruthless clarity. They had stolen my trip. They had insulted me to my face. They had used my love as a weakness. But Harrison had made a monumental miscalculation. He grew up watching me serve, watching me cook, watching me yield. And he confused my service with stupidity. He thought that because he swiped around on a modern app on his phone, he had control of the money. He was completely oblivious to the fact that the master bank account, the original contract, and the security clauses of the fund were tied exclusively to my signature, my fingerprints, and my physical presence at the bank. All he had was an extension, an illusion of power that I had handed him out of convenience and affection, a permission slip that could be revoked just as easily as flipping a light switch. I didn't pick up the mugs. I didn't wipe the tablecloth. I didn't wash the skillet. I walked out of the kitchen and headed straight for the solid wood front door. I looked out at the empty street one last time. The sun was just starting to bake the asphalt. Their vacation was just beginning. I pushed the heavy door, listening to the friction of the hinges. I gripped the brass doorknob with absolute certainty. The love hadn't disappeared. It had simply changed its locks. I slammed the door shut, and the metallic clack of the deadbolt sliding into place echoed down the empty hallway, marking the exact, definitive end of my submission. I was alone in my house, and I had exactly 12 hours before they walked up to the reception desk of that 5-star resort. 12 hours to develop the true photograph of this family. The metallic echo of the deadbolt snapping into place bounced off the hallway walls and slowly faded away, leaving an absolute stillness in its wake. I stood in front of that solid wood door for a couple of minutes, my hands still resting on the cold brass knob. I didn't feel the tremor that usually accompanies massive disappointments. There was no lump in my throat, no suffocating pressure in my chest that I had experienced so many times in the past when my family failed me. What I felt was a staggering lucidity, a mental sharpness you only achieve when you stop trying to focus on a blurry image and instead change the lens entirely. I turned around and began to walk through my own house. The hardwood floor creaked softly beneath my feet, a familiar sound that for 5 years had been masked by the screaming of children, Lauren's constant complaining, and my son's heavy footsteps. I walked through the living room. Hunter's plastic toys were scattered like landmines across the Persian rug I bought with my first big photography contract. The sofa cushions were thrown on the floor. The 3 half-empty coffee cups were still on the centre table. A thick, dark drop, slowly sliding down the white porcelain to stain the oak wood. Yesterday, that sight would have triggered a sigh of resignation before I went to fetch a damp rag. Today, it was simply evidence. It was a crime scene I was no longer willing to scrub away. I walked down the hall to the back of the house, bypassing the kitchen and the plate of cold pancakes. I stopped in front of a dark wooden door I hardly ever opened these days. It was my old dark room. The sanctuary where I had spent the late nights of my youth, turning strips of celluloid into indelible memories for other families. I pushed the door open. The smell of old chemicals, of fixer and photographic paper still hung in the stagnant air. A time capsule welcoming me back. I flipped on the red safe light, the only light the main bulb allowed, and the room was bathed in a scarlet glow that turned the shadows into solid shapes. I went straight to the old grey metal filing cabinet, resting under the unplugged enlarger. I crouched down, feeling the slight pop in my knees, and pulled out a tiny brass key I always kept hidden in the inner pocket of my apron. I unlocked the bottom drawer. There were no negatives in there, no wedding albums of strangers. There were thick manila folders organised with an alphabetical and chronological precision that Lauren, with all her disdain for my supposed modern ignorance, could never possibly comprehend. I pulled out the folder labelled with the year my life changed for the first time. I sat on the wooden stool and opened it on the workbench. The first document was a banking contract with yellowed edges. Seeing that signature, my own signature, written with firmer, younger strokes, dragged me 15 years into the past with the force of a shutter snapping in the dark. It was the morning after Raymond walked out. I was 56 years old, broken-hearted, staring at a stack of debt collection notices on the dining room table. Raymond had drained our joint account before boarding a plane with his new illusion. I remember sitting in that exact same kitchen chair, crying silently so I wouldn't wake Harrison, who was 24 at the time and had just finished college. When my son finally came down for breakfast, he saw my swollen eyes and the bank papers. I explained to him, my voice cracking, that his father had left us with nothing, that we would have to mortgage the house, that I would have to work double shifts. I expected a hug. I expected my son, now a grown man, to tell me we would get through this together. Instead, Harrison checked his watch, grabbed a piece of toast and said, "Mum, keep me out of your drama. I have a job interview and I'm running late. Figure it out. You always know what to do." That afternoon, 15 years ago, I dried my tears. I drove to the main bank branch downtown and opened a master account exclusively in my name. I deposited the advance payment from a series of 3 weddings I was booked to shoot that month. I swore to the branch manager, a young guy in an immaculate suit, that no one but me would ever have power over those funds. I signed rigid security clauses, the kind that require physical presence and a fingerprint for any substantial modification. When Harrison came home weeks later asking for cash for a down payment on a car, I told him no. He threw a fit, but I stood my ground. Over the years, the sheer exhaustion and the desperate desire to keep my family together had softened me. When Harrison came back defeated 5 years ago with his wife and kids, I let him link a mobile app to a secondary account that fed off my master account. I gave him an extension of my platinum credit card. I gave him the illusion of control because I wanted him to regain his dignity as the head of his household. But the master account, the financial beating heart of my entire net worth, was still governed by the original contract I now held in my hands. I closed the folder. Nostalgia had no place in this room. Nostalgia is a deceptive filter that softens the sharp edges of betrayal and I needed the raw, high-contrast image. I stood up, turned off the red light, and walked out of the dark room. I went to my ground floor bedroom, took off the apron stained with flour and butter, and tossed it into the very bottom of the laundry hamper. I opened the closet. I didn't reach for the comfortable grandma clothes Lauren bought me on clearance so I'd match my role as the live-in nanny. I dug into the back, where I kept the clothes of the woman who built a business out of absolutely nothing. I pulled out a dark grey linen tailored suit, a white silk blouse that still held the perfect crease from the dry cleaner, and a pair of sensible, low-heeled pumps. I dressed with the slow deliberation of a soldier securing her armour before stepping onto a battlefield she knows by heart. I went to the vanity, pulled my white hair back into a tight bun, and applied a discreet but firm shade of red lipstick. I put on my authentic pearl earrings, the only ones Raymond couldn't steal. I grabbed my black leather handbag, slipped the manila folder inside, and walked out of my room. I didn't look at the mess in the house. My mind was already miles ahead, calculating the trajectory of the strike. I opened the front door and stepped out onto the porch. The mid-morning sun was already beating down hard, promising a suffocating day. As I walked down the tiled path toward the sidewalk, I heard the rhythmic snipping of pruning shears. On the other side of the low wrought iron fence was Margaret. Margaret was 73. She was a retired school teacher and had been a widow for 2 decades. She was one of those women who monitored the neighbourhood with the precision of a hawk, and she had a tongue as sharp as the shears she was using to decapitate the dead roses in her garden. We had known each other since Harrison and his kids weren't even a blueprint. "Constance," she called out, lowering her shears and leaning against the fence. "Don't you look elegant? And how strange! I could have sworn I saw Harrison and Lauren running out of here with the kids and suitcases the size of refrigerators just a couple of hours ago. I figured the cab forgot about you. Weren't you going to the beach?" I stopped in front of her. I could have lied. I could have invented some excuse about a sudden stomach bug or urgent paperwork that kept me from travelling. That was the custom of mothers from our generation, covering up our children's sins with the blanket of our own invention to save face. But the time for keeping up appearances ended the moment my son sent me to clean the kitchen. "They didn't forget me, Margaret," I replied, my voice calm and level in the hot morning air. Harrison decided at the last minute that my presence on the trip was an unnecessary expense and that the kids needed space. I was informed that my vacation would consist of staying here to clean the house and water the backyard plants. Margaret dropped her shears onto the grass with a dull thud. Her eyes, framed by fine laugh lines, went wide. Disbelief quickly gave way to a silent, simmering outrage, the kind of unified fury that only another woman our age can fully comprehend. "They left you behind?" she asked, dropping her voice as if the words were too ugly to be spoken aloud. "After you paid for every last penny of that damn luxury trip. Because I know damn well Lauren hasn't worked a single day since they invaded your living room, Constance." "They took the platinum credit card," I added, looking my neighbour dead in the eye. "Harrison told me the hotel needed the physical plastic for the security deposit, and they left." Margaret pressed her lips together until they formed a thin white line. She looked toward my house, eyeing the half-drawn curtains and the silence radiating from the property. "Constance, if you need us to go get a lawyer, my nephew is excellent. We can—" "I don't need a lawyer, Margaret," I interrupted gently, offering a smile that held not a single drop of joy. "I need to go to the bank, and I need you to call me immediately if you see a moving truck, a taxi, or any unfamiliar vehicle pull up in front of my house this afternoon." Margaret held my gaze for a long second. She saw the cold determination in my posture, the grey suit, the leather bag tucked tightly under my arm. A spark of recognition flared in her pupils. She understood. She wasn't talking to the resigned grandmother. She was talking to the owner of the property. "A leaf won't blow across your driveway without me writing it down in my notebook, Constance," she said firmly, picking up her shears. "You do what you have to do, and for the love of God, Don't you touch a single dish in that kitchen.
I wasn't planning on it, I replied, and turned to walk toward the main avenue. I hailed a cab at the corner. The ride to the financial district took about 20 minutes, time I spent watching the heavy city traffic through the window. I thought about Harrison. Right about now, they would be boarding the plane. Lauren was probably complaining about the legroom in coach, while Harrison scrolled on his phone, utterly convinced that the family fund, that magical well that never dried up, would cover every whim of their trip. The problem with people who have never had to build anything from scratch is that they are entirely ignorant of how foundations work. They look at the finished building and believe it belongs to them simply because they live inside it. The cab pulled up in front of the bank's main branch. It was an imposing building, with marble columns and revolving glass doors, a place designed to intimidate debtors and reassure creditors. I pushed through the door and stepped inside. The air conditioning hit my face instantly, cooling the sweat on my forehead. The low hum of financial transactions, the clacking of keyboards, and the whir of printers filled the massive lobby. I didn't go to the quick service teller windows. I walked straight toward the commercial platform area, where mahogany desks replaced plastic counters. I approached the reception assistant, a young woman wearing a wireless headset. "Good morning. I need to see Ernest Sterling," I said, placing my hands flat on her desk. The girl looked at me with a hollow, professional smile. "Mr. Sterling is the branch general manager, ma'am. He only sees top-tier accounts by appointment. Would you like me to direct you to a standard account executive? Tell Mr. Sterling that Constance Villeda is here, and tell him I have come to execute the security clause on master account ending in 479. The assistant blinked, thrown off by my tone of voice and the precision of the numbers. She typed my name into her computer. Her expression shifted drastically in a matter of seconds. The hollow smile vanished, replaced by an attitude of genuine, urgent service. "Of course, Mrs. Villeda. Please give me just one moment." She picked up the phone, murmured a few words, and then stood up, gesturing with an open hand. "Mr. Sterling will see you immediately in his office. Right this way, please." Ernest's office was at the end of the hall, behind a frosted glass door. When I walked in, he was already standing, buttoning his suit jacket. Ernest was a man in his 50s with greying hair and impeccable manners. He had been the junior executive who helped me 15 years ago when I opened the account after Raymond bolted. Now he was the branch director, but he never forgot who his founding clients were. "Constance, what a wonderful surprise. Please, have a seat," he said, offering me one of the leather chairs facing his desk. "Can I offer you coffee? Water?" "Water will be fine, Ernest. Thank you." I waited for him to pour the cold glass of water. I took a sip, settled into the chair, and opened my leather bag. I pulled out the manila folder and slid it across the polished surface of the desk until it rested right in front of him. "Ernest, I'm not here for a courtesy call. I need to make immediate restrictive moves on my financial structure." He caught the tone in my voice. He sat down, put on his reading glasses, and opened the folder. He looked at the original contract. "Tell me what you need, Constance. You know I'm at your complete disposal." "First, I want to report the platinum credit card ending in 8813 as compromised. I want it blocked immediately. No possibility of phone or digital reactivation. Total fraud lockdown." Ernest frowned, his fingers already hovering over his keyboard. "It was stolen. Do you want us to file a police report?" "It wasn't stolen on the street. I handed it to my son Harrison under the premise that it would be used to cover the expenses of a family trip that I was supposed to be on. This morning, my son decided to cut me out of the trip, leaving me home with orders to clean up his mess. But he took the plastic, claiming he needed it for the hotel security deposit. I am revoking my authorization for that line of credit. If he tries to swipe it, I want the system to reject it irrevocably." Ernest paused, his hands over the keyboard. He looked up over the rim of his glasses, staring at me with a mix of professional shock and human empathy. He knew the history. He knew I had mortgaged and paid off this house with the sweat of my brow.
Constance, if I flag the card as compromised with a hard lockdown, the alert will trigger the second they try to run a charge. If they're at a hotel and ask for a pre-authorization, the terminal won't just decline it. The bank will freeze any other payment attempt tied to that plastic. They will have zero physical credit. That is exactly the intention, Ernest. Proceed. The manager nodded in silence. The clatter of keys echoed in the closed office. Done. Platinum card is dead. Is there anything else? Yes. The secondary account linked to Harrison's mobile app, the one we call the Family Fund. I have it on my screen right now, Ernest said, adjusting his glasses. It carries a substantial balance. It's the money you transferred 3 weeks ago for the coast trip. I want you to drain that secondary account, transfer 100% of the funds back into my individual master account. And then I want you to revoke the access permissions for Harrison's mobile app to the master account. I want his phone to be a useless piece of glass when he tries to check my balances. Ernest leaned back in his chair, weighing the consequences of what I was asking. Constance, I completely understand your position, but I have to warn you from an operational standpoint. If I move the funds now and revoke the app access, the secondary account drops to zero. If your son tries to pay for the return flight, the hotel food, or any emergency using the app, he thinks he controls the transaction, will be declined for insufficient funds. They will be completely stranded. No physical card, no digital funds. I kept my spine perfectly straight. I did not break eye contact. The image of Lauren pushing my plate of pancakes away with disgust, and Harrison's voice telling me, "Stay here and clean the house," replayed in my mind with bone-chilling clarity. Ernest, I am a 71-year-old woman. I spent the last 3 decades of my life making sure my son never lacked a roof over his head, a hot meal, or financial backing. Today, he proved to me that my sacrifice didn't forge a grateful man. It forged a comfortable tyrant. Drain the account. The general manager didn't ask another question. He printed out 3 sheets of paper filled with banking jargon, account numbers, and declarations revoking power of attorney. He handed me a heavy black ink pen. I read every single line with my methodical mind, making absolutely sure there were no legal loopholes. I signed the 3 pages with the exact same determination I had when I signed Raymond's divorce papers. The black ink sealed the fate of my son's vacation. The funds have been transferred to your master account, Constance. The secondary account is at zero. The physical card is dead. The system takes roughly a couple of hours to update across the international network. By the time your son walks up to the counter of that 5-star hotel, he won't have a single red cent to his name. Thank you, Ernest. I knew I could count on you. I tucked my copies into the manila folder, stood up, and shook his hand. I walked out of the bank feeling like the air was lighter, like my lungs were filling with pure oxygen for the first time in 5 years. I caught a cab back to my neighbourhood. I got home shortly after noon. The silence was still there, waiting for me. Margaret wasn't in her garden, but I noticed her living room curtains twitch slightly when I unlatched my front gate. She was standing watch. I went inside. The heat was starting to build up in the hallway, so I opened the living room windows to let the breeze push out the stale air. I walked right past Hunter's discarded shoes. I didn't pick them up. I went into the kitchen. The orange juice spilled on the clean tablecloth had dried into a sticky, yellowish stain. The skillet with the charred butter remnants sat on the cold stove. I poured myself a glass of tap water, leaned against the granite counter, and looked at the wall clock. 1:15 p.m. The flight should have landed. They were probably grabbing those massive suitcases my son dragged across my hardwood floors. Suddenly, the silence of the house shattered. My cell phone, resting in the pocket of my grey jacket, began to vibrate and ring relentlessly. I pulled the device out. Harrison's name was flashing on the screen. I didn't answer on the first ring. I let it ring 3 times, feeling the weight of the plastic in my hand, savouring the absolute control of the moment. On the 4th ring, I swiped the screen and brought the phone to my ear. "Hello," I said, my voice perfectly neutral and calm. "Mum," Harrison's voice sounded agitated, layered over the typical background noise of a crowded airport. PA announcements, rolling suitcase wheels, the echo of hundreds of people. You finally picked up. We just landed. The kids are being unbearable. Lauren has a headache from the cabin pressure, and luggage claim took forever. What a grueling trip, son. I can only imagine how exhausted you must be, I replied, deploying my finest dry irony. The exact tone he always mistook for genuine maternal concern. Yeah, a total disaster. Listen, we're walking toward the cab line to head to the resort. I just wanted to make sure of something. Did you clean the kitchen yet? Lauren left some things out and she doesn't want it getting infested with ants. Oh, and remember to water the plants. They'll die fast in this heat. I closed my eyes for a second. The sheer audacity of his words was so massive it was almost fascinating. He was thousands of miles away, spending my money, and he was still handing me maintenance chores. Don't worry about the house, Harrison, I said, opening my eyes and locking my gaze onto the juice stain on the tablecloth. Everything is in the exact same place you left it. Not a single dish has been moved. Perfect. Oh, one more thing. I need you to open the banking app on your phone. The moment had arrived. The trap was about to snap shut. The banking app? What for, son? You said you managed everything from your smartphone. Yeah, I manage it, he replied, impatiently, raising his voice over the airport noise. But sometimes when you make large payments out of state, the system asks for a confirmation from the primary device. We're going to get to the hotel in about 40 minutes, and I need to put down the security deposit with the Platinum card and pay the first instalment for the excursions using the app fund. I just want to make sure everything is good to go. Did you make any transactions today? I pushed off the kitchen counter. I walked slowly toward the living room, staring at the dirty coffee mugs. The symmetry of the moment was flawless. He had used his supposed technological and financial superiority to leave me behind, treating me like a penniless maid. Now that exact same technology was going to hit him back with mathematical precision. Actually, yes, Harrison, I said, my voice ringing as clear and cold as ice. I went out a little while ago. I had to sort out some business at the bank. At the bank? Why would you go physically if I have the app? Look, whatever. As long as you didn't touch the family fund, we're fine. See you in a few days, Mum. Get some rest and make sure you scrub the upstairs floors. Enjoy the hotel, son. I'm quite sure the reception will be unforgettable. Yeah, bye, he said, and hung up without waiting for my reply. I lowered the phone. The screen went dark. I sat down on my living room sofa, ignoring the scattered cushions, and opened my own banking app. I punched in my security passcode. The screen lit up with the data from my master account. The balance reflected the entirety of my life savings. Secure, locked down, and absolutely inaccessible to anyone breathing who wasn't me. I swiped down to view the secondary account. The famous family fund. Available base $0. Platinum card status cancelled by cardholder. I leaned back against the sofa cushions, folded my hands in my lap, and let out a long, deep sigh. The wall clock kept ticking relentless. 40 minutes, Harrison had said. 40 minutes until the cab dropped them off at the glass doors of a 5-star paradise they had absolutely no way to pay for. 40 minutes until the hotel manager informed my son that the maid he left scrubbing his floors had just quit, taking the keys to the kingdom with her. The real family vacation was just about to begin, and I, for the first time in years, had the best seat in the house to watch the fall. The ticking of the wall clock kept time with my breathing in the living room. I sat on the couch with my back straight and my hands clasped in my lap, observing the space around me. The midday light filtered through the blinds, painting lines of dust suspended in the hot air. In front of me, the oak table displayed the 3 abandoned coffee cups, the dark stains already dried onto the polished wood. To my left, a mountain of obnoxiously coloured toys blocked the path to the hallway. To my right, a pair of Lauren's designer shoes rested on my Persian rug, as if the mess were a rite of conquest. For 5 years I had looked at this room and seen a family. I had forced my brain to apply a warm filter over the chaos. convincing myself that the mess meant life, that the exhaustion was just the natural price of being the pillar for my blood. But now, with silence wrapping the house and the bank account secured, the filter had vanished. What I saw wasn't a home full of life. It was a scene meticulously constructed for my own servitude. I wasn't the respected matriarch. I was the domestic help, bankrolling her own employers. In professional photography, there is a concept called depth of field. It's the area of the image that appears sharp while the rest blurs into the background. For decades, my son Harrison had been my singular point of focus. Everything else, my needs, my exhaustion, the disrespect, remained blurry, thrown out of focus by my maternal instinct. But instincts can be deceiving if you refuse to look at the original negatives. The first time I noticed the blemish on the negative wasn't this morning. It was 25 years ago. Harrison was 12 and the Christmas season had just ended. I had worked 14-hour days at the studio photographing strangers' families in matching sweaters, just so I could buy him the imported mountain bike he had been begging for. It was an absurd expense for our budget, but Raymond, my ex-husband, had insisted the boy couldn't have less than his private school friends. A week after Christmas, I found the bike dumped in the driveway with a busted chain and a scraped frame. Harrison had just dropped it there to go play video games. When I confronted him and asked him to help me clean it and take it to the shop, Raymond intervened. "Let it go, Constance, he's just a kid. If it breaks, we'll buy another one." That's why you work so hard. I remember looking at Harrison in that exact moment. There was no guilt in his 12-year-old eyes. There was a tiny, crooked smirk, a look of sheer superiority aimed right at me. He had understood in that fraction of a second that my effort had no value, that my labour was an endless resource at his disposal, and that he would never have to face the consequences of his own carelessness. I took a mental photograph of that smirk. I filed it away in the darkest corner of my memory and forced myself to forget it. But the chemicals of memory always end up developing the truth eventually. I stood up from the couch. The time for passive contemplation was over. The methodical mind that allowed me to build a business in an era when women rarely owned their own studios took absolute control of my limbs. I walked to the landline phone in the kitchen, ignoring the plate of pancakes still sitting on the table. I picked up the receiver and dialed a number I knew by heart. "Artie's Lock and Key, good afternoon," rasped a voice on the other end. "Artie, it's Constance Valeda. I need your services at my house immediately." "Constance, great to hear from you. Locked yourself out again?" joked the old man, a guy who had been running his little shop 3 streets over for 40 years. "No, Artie, I'm inside, but I need to change the locks on the front door, the back door, and the garage gate. And I need you to install high-security cylinders, the computerized key ones that can't be copied at any random hardware store." There was a brief silence on the line. Artie knew my family. He had watched Harrison grow up. "Did something happen, Constance? Somebody try to break in?" "Something like that, Artie. But the robbery stops today. Can you be here in 10 minutes? I'll pay double your emergency rate in cash." "I'll be there in 5, Constance. Have the coffee ready." I hung up the phone. I went to my room, pulled a wad of bills from the mechanical safe I kept hidden behind the old photo albums in my closet, and walked back to the living room. Just as I reached the hallway, the back doorbell rang. It was Margaret. My neighbour pushed through the screen door into the kitchen. She was carrying a glass pitcher full of cold lemonade and 2 glasses. Her eyes scanned the mess in the kitchen with a mix of disgust and unified rage. "I saw you come back in a cab an hour ago," she said, setting the pitcher down on the granite counter, far away from the spilled orange juice. "I figured you'd need something cold to drink, and maybe some help bagging up the garbage that woman left all over your living room." I managed a tight smile. Margaret wasn't just a nosy neighbour. She was a tactical ally who understood the language of domestic survival. "I'll take the lemonade, Margaret, but we aren't throwing anything in the garbage.
I am not handing them a destruction of property argument so they can play the victims. We are going to pack. Before Margaret could ask anything else, the front doorbell rang. I went to open it. Artie was standing there with his heavy metal toolbox, wiping the sweat from his forehead with a cloth handkerchief. I let him in. For the next hour, the whine of power drills turning screwdrivers and clanking metal replaced the oppressive silence of the house. Margaret and I sat on the kitchen stools, drinking lemonade, watching Artie dismantle the old brass lock on the front door. The exact same lock Harrison had copied and given to Lauren the day they moved in. As I watched the old cylinder drop into Artie's palm, another negative from my memory developed right before my eyes with agonizing clarity. It was 4 years ago. Lauren had been living under my roof for a year. I had gone out to buy fever medicine for my grandson, Hunter, an expense that came out of my pocket, naturally. When I got back, I noticed the downstairs hallway looked different. I walked over to the large mahogany console I'd inherited from my grandmother. I used to keep a collection of my favourite photographs in silver frames on it. Black and white portraits of my parents, a picture of Harrison as a baby, and a couple of landscapes I'd shot on my first trips. Every single frame was gone. In their place sat a massive, hideous, modern ceramic vase, surrounded by fashion magazines and a bowl for tossing keys. I found Lauren in the kitchen filing her nails while drinking a glass of the wine I had been saving for a special occasion. I asked her about my photographs. She didn't even look me in the eye. "Oh, Constance," she drawled, dripping with her usual condescension. "I put them in a cardboard box out in the garage. That table looked too gloomy, like a shrine for the dead. The kids need a modern environment with good energy. Besides, you're always in your little dark room anyway. You can look at your pictures in there." I went to the garage. I found the box. Someone had thrown a bag of muddy shoes on top of it, shattering the glass on my parents' portrait. I knelt on the cold concrete floor, picking up the shards of glass with my bare hands. I sliced my index finger open. The blood stained the edge of the silver frame. Right then and there, I should have thrown her out on the street. I should have taken the box, marched into the kitchen, and demanded she vacate my property. But I didn't. I bandaged my finger, shoved the box under my bed, and cleaned up the blood in silence. I had justified her cruelty, telling myself she was just stressed about money, that she was a young mother trying to build a nest in someone else's house. I had been a coward dressed up as a martyr. The metallic snap of the new lock sliding into the door yanked me back to the present. "All set, Constance," Artie announced, wiping his hands on a rag. 3 brand new locks, high security. Here are the only 3 copies of the keys. You couldn't pop these with professional lockpicks without waking the dead. I paid him his rate, adding a very generous tip. I walked him to the door and listened to the solid, definitive click of the deadbolt as I locked it from the inside. It was a beautiful sound. It was the sound of a restored border. I turned back to Margaret, who had already started gathering the plastic toys from the living room and tossing them into an empty cardboard box she found in the hall. "Leave that, Margaret. The toys go up to the room they were using on the second floor. What we are going to pack are the adults' belongings." I went to the utility closet and pulled out 2 massive rolls of thick, black plastic garbage bags, the heavy-duty kind you use for yard debris. I walked back to the living room. "What exactly do you have in mind, Constance?" my neighbour asked, a spark of anticipation dancing in her eyes. "We are going to clean the house, exactly like my son ordered me to," I replied, snapping the first bag open with a sharp flick. We started in the living room. I shoved Lauren's designer shoes deep into the bottom of the bag. Then I walked over to the console table, grabbed all the fashion magazines, the absurd decorative bowls, and that damn modern ceramic vase. I dumped it all into the black bags. Margaret kept pace with military efficiency, clearing the coffee table, snatching up the jackets Harrison left draped over the armchairs, and emptying the hallway drawers where they had hoarded years of junk mail and receipts for useless purchases. We marched up to the second floor. The heat was thicker up there.
The room that used to be my pristine guest bedroom was now a battlefield of unfolded laundry, cosmetics smeared across the dresser, and half-emptied suitcases they had decided not to take on the trip. I didn't handle anything with care. I didn't fold Harrison's linen shirts, nor did I separate Lauren's lace underwear. I grabbed entire stacks of clothes straight off the shelves and dropped them into the black bags. I emptied the drawer full of expensive cosmetics paid for by the family fund, of course, and tossed them in, right on top of the shoes. The sound of crinkling plastic taking on weight was the soundtrack to my emancipation. Margaret worked in silence, but her heavy breathing betrayed the sheer satisfaction she was getting from the job. We filled 6 massive bags just with the stuff from the master bedroom. Then we moved to the shared bathroom. I swept all the exfoliating creams, imported shampoos, and electric razors off the counter. I threw it all into another bag. As I tied a tight knot at the top of the 7th bundle, sweat dripped down my forehead and my hands stung. The physical labour was grueling for a woman my age, but the energy pumping through my veins was pure adrenaline. Every single object I removed from my sight was a tiny victory. One less brick in the wall of humiliation they had built around me. Margaret wiped her forehead with the back of her hand, staring at the mountain of bags with a satisfied grin that lit up her wrinkled face. "If you could see your face right now, Constance," she chuckled softly. "You look 20 years younger. What are you going to do with all this?" "When they get back, and I promise you it won't take them many days to do so, they will find their luggage packed and ready for their permanent move," I replied, leaning against the stair banister to catch my breath. "They're going to think you lost your mind. They'll think it was a fit of rage over what happened this morning." I slowly shook my head. I walked into the kitchen, turned on the faucet, and splashed cold water on my face. The icy shock cleared away whatever trace of doubt might have been lingering in my system. "It wasn't a fit of rage, Margaret. Rage is messy. It's impulsive. Today is the result of methodical observation. They think the trigger was the beach trip, but the trip was just the perfect excuse to execute a plan I mapped out 6 months ago." Margaret frowned, stepping closer to the counter. "6 months ago? What happened 6 months ago, Constance?" I dried my face with a clean towel, looked my neighbour straight in the eye, and let the third and final negative, the darkest one of all, come into the light. It was mid-November of last year. It was cold out. I was in my darkroom, the space they despised because it smelled like old chemicals. I had pulled the heavy wooden door shut to organise some old tax receipts. They thought I had gone to the grocery store. Harrison and Lauren were in the hallway, right on the other side of my sanctuary's door, talking in low voices, but loud enough that the acoustics of the old house carried every single syllable to me with terrifying clarity. "How much longer do we have to put up with this museum decor?" Lauren had complained, her heels clicking on the wood. "Your friends are coming over on Friday, and I'm embarrassed for them to see your mother's furniture. And let's not even talk about that mothball smell." "Patience, babe," Harrison had replied, his voice the voice of the boy I nursed. The young man whose education I paid for sounded cold, calculating, entirely devoid of affection. "The old lady is already 70. She doesn't have much independent time left. As long as she keeps paying the bills, the mortgage and the kids' tuition, we keep saving our own cash. The second she starts losing her mind or her health, we put her in a nice nursing home using her own pension. We sell this outdated mansion, buy the condo on the north side, and problem solved. You just have to keep smiling at her and letting her think she's the boss of the kitchen. She loves feeling useful." I was sitting on my wooden stool, surrounded by darkness, listening to my only son plot my exile and my social death, as if he were discussing a real estate transaction. I didn't cry. The pain was so deep, so agonizingly sharp, that it bypassed the capacity for tears. It was a clean slice right through the soul. In that dark room, I realized I wasn't raising a family. I was housing 2 parasites who were patiently waiting for the host to die so they could feast on the remains. From that day on, I stopped being the selfless mother and became the cartographer of my own defense. I audited every bank statement. I mapped exactly how they were using my money. I isolated the master account, making sure Harrison only have access to the monthly cash flow I allowed. I played the role of the docile old woman. I cooked their pancakes, I ironed his white shirts. I watched them grow bolder in their arrogance, just waiting for the exact moment when their own greed would leave them totally vulnerable. The luxury resort trip was the stage they built for their own downfall. Margaret listened to me in absolute silence. Her smile was completely gone. Her eyes shone with a mixture of horror and profound respect. "My God, Constance," she whispered, raising a hand to her mouth. "What kind of monsters do we raise sometimes without even realizing it?" We aren't responsible for the choices they make once they're adults, Margaret. But we are responsible for not leaving a loaded gun in their hands once we figure out who they really are. We finished cleaning the kitchen. I threw the cold pancakes in the garbage, scrubbed the juice stain until the tablecloth was spotless, and washed the skillet with boiling water. The house, though, stripped of its superfluous clutter, and with the black bags piled by the door, smelled like lemon and wood wax again. It smelled like my home again. Margaret said goodbye in the late afternoon. She promised me she'd leave her living room window cracked so she could hear any commotion and that she'd keep her phone close. I locked the new deadbolt behind her, testing the firm grip of the mechanism. I walked into the dining room and sat at the head of the table. A chair I hadn't occupied since Harrison claimed it 5 years ago, arguing he needed the legroom. I opened my manila folder, spreading the signed bank documents across the clean wood. The receipts for the blocked account, the records of the fund transfer, the cancellation of the platinum card. Everything was in order. The dossier was complete. The sun began to dip, painting the inside of the house in shades of orange and crimson. The wall clock struck 5. It had been nearly 4 hours since I spoke to Harrison on the phone. 4 hours since he, brimming with superiority, swaggered toward the reception desk of a 5-star hotel with his haughty wife and their massive suitcases. The cell phone vibrated on the dining room table, shattering the sepulchral silence of the afternoon. I looked at the screen. It wasn't Harrison. It was an unknown number, a long international area code full of zeros. The kind of number used by luxury hotel switchboards or overseas assistance services. I let it ring. The vibration rattled the phone a few millimeters across the polished wood. I watched the number flash on the blank screen with the exact same detachment a lab tech watches a predictable chemical reaction. The system had worked. The physical card had been declined. The mobile app had shown a balance of 0. The public humiliation, the very thing they had dished out to me in the privacy of my kitchen, was now playing out in front of impeccably dressed receptionists and wealthy guests. The phone stopped ringing. The screen went black. 10 seconds later, it lit up again. This time, the photo I had taken of Harrison on his graduation day popped up on the screen. He was calling from his own line, probably burning through his emergency data. Desperate. I rested my elbows on the mahogany table, steepled my fingers under my chin, and kept my eyes locked on the vibrating phone. The trap had slammed shut with a metallic snap, just as final and unyielding as the new deadbolt on my front door. The spoiled kid who broke bicycles without an ounce of guilt, and the cold man who plotted my exile to a nursing home, were about to discover that the woman who developed the photographs, the woman who stayed behind to clean the house, had always owned the camera. I took a deep breath, savouring the clean air of my reclaimed home, and reached for the phone. The vacation had just begun. I swiped my finger across the glass, accepted the call, and brought the device to my ear with deliberate slowness. The absolute protective silence of my dining room clashed violently against the chaos bursting from the tiny speaker. I could hear the elegant murmur of a hotel lobby, the distant clinking of glasses, soft piano music playing in the background, and over all of it, the ragged,
practically suffocating breathing of my son.
"Mum," Harrison yelled. His voice had lost all the bored condescension from that morning. It was loaded with sharp, humiliating panic. "Mum, the bank system is glitching. You have to call your branch right now. Tell that manager of yours to fix this disaster." I kept my eyes locked on the wood grain of my mahogany table. I didn't shift my posture. "Good afternoon, Harrison. Did you make it to the hotel? How's the weather on the coast?" "Screw the weather, Mum," he roared, completely losing his composure, forgetting he was standing in the lobby of a five-star resort. "The platinum card bounced. The receptionist ran it through 3 different terminals and the machine says it's flagged for fraud. And that's not the worst part." I opened the app to try and do a direct wire transfer, and the family fund is at 0. "Zero, Mum? What did you do at the bank?" I propped my elbow on the table and rested my chin in my free hand. I could picture the scene perfectly. Harrison in his white linen shirt, wrinkled from the flight, sweating cold bullets in front of an imported marble counter. Lauren standing next to him with her designer sunglasses pushed up on her head, feeling the stares of the wealthy guests burning into them as they recognized the unmistakable stench of a declined card. "There is no glitch in the system, son," I replied, my voice flowing with the calm of an underground river. "I did exactly what I told you I was going to do. I went to sort out some business, I blocked the card for unauthorized use, and I transferred my money, the money from my labour, back into the master account, the one you no longer have access to." A heavy silence fell over the line. The lobby noise seemed to fade away as Harrison's brain scrambled to process the magnitude of my words. When he finally spoke again, his pitch had dropped 2 octaves. Panic replaced by a furious disbelief. "Are you insane? You cancelled my cards while I'm 1,000 miles from home. We are standing at reception, Constance. I have my kids crying from exhaustion, suitcases all over the floor, and a manager in a suit looking at me like I'm some drifter who sneaked in to steal the towels. Unblock that account immediately." "No." The syllable was short, dry, sharp as the drop of a guillotine. It was the very first time in 46 years that I had given him an absolute no. No justifications, no apologetic tone, no door left open for negotiation. "What do you mean, no?" Harrison stammered, his voice cracking slightly. "Mum, this isn't funny. Lauren is about to have a nervous breakdown. The cab from the airport charged us a fortune, and I told him I'd charge it to the room. We don't have cash. We can't pay the deposit. We don't even have a way to pay for a flight back if they kick us out of here." "You told me this morning that the vacation was just for you guys, Harrison," I reminded him, savouring every single word, feeding him his own poison in exact doses. "You told me the money belonged to the family, and that the family was only you, your wife, and your kids. Well, if you are the family, then as the head of that family, it's your job to provide. The trip is yours, so are the expenses." I heard a scuffle on the other end of the line. The dull clatter of plastic hitting something, followed by Lauren's shrill, hysterical voice. She had snatched the phone away from him. "Listen to me, lady," my daughter-in-law screamed, dropping every ounce of the fake elegance she had maintained for 5 years. "Cut it out with the bitter old woman tantrums. Do us a favour, call the bank and fix this. I am not going to let my children go through this public humiliation just because of your complexes. People are staring at us." I closed my eyes for a second. The image of Lauren pushing away my plate of pancakes with disdain flashed through my mind. "Public humiliations are terrible, aren't they, Lauren?" I said softly. "Especially when you have no way to foot the bill for your own arrogance. But don't you worry. Harrison is an expert at managing the banking app from his smartphone. I am completely sure that someone as modern and capable as him will find a way to fix this, without the help of an old woman who's only good for cleaning the house." "You are a monster," she shrieked. "You left us stranded." "No, Lauren, you left me stranded in my own kitchen. I just stopped paying for the getaway car." By the way, tell the kids I love them very much and I wish you both the best of luck finding a bus back home. Oh, and don't call me again. I'm very busy cleaning the house, exactly like I was ordered to. I didn't wait for her to reply. I tapped the red button on the screen and ended the call. I immediately went into my phone settings and blocked both Harrison's and Lauren's numbers. Then I powered the device off completely and left it on the dining room table. The silence rushed back in, but this time it wasn't an oppressive silence. It was a flawless melody. I stood up from the table and walked into the kitchen. The afternoon sun bathed the granite counters in a warm golden light. For the first time in half a decade, I didn't have to cook separate dinners. I didn't have to listen to complaints about whether the food had too much salt or not enough. I didn't have to wash dishes I hadn't made dirty. I went to the pantry and pulled out a bottle of red wine I had bought years ago, one I had hidden behind the canned goods so Lauren wouldn't drink it on one of her lazy afternoons. I uncorked it. I poured myself a generous glass. That night I made myself a seared steak with asparagus, my absolute favourite meal, the one I never cooked because Harrison didn't like the smell of seared meat in the house. I ate at the dining room table, savouring every bite, sipping the wine slowly while I watched the 7 black garbage bags piled up in my entryway, like plastic sentinels guarding my newly reclaimed freedom. When it was time for bed, I walked upstairs. I passed by the room they used to occupy. The door was open. Inside, the beds were unmade, the closets were empty, and the air no longer smelled like their expensive perfumes. It smelled like dust and cardboard boxes. I went into my own ground floor bedroom, slipped into a clean cotton nightgown, and climbed between the sheets. I expected to feel guilty. I expected the ghost of a mother's love to ambush me in the middle of the night, torturing me with visions of my grandchildren sleeping on plastic airport chairs. But my strategic mind knew the kids were never in any real danger. Lauren had parents in another city. Harrison had friends. Someone would loan them the money for cheap bus tickets. They would suffer discomfort, yes. They would suffer humiliation, absolutely. But they wouldn't die. The guilt never came. Instead, I experienced a deep, uninterrupted, deeply restorative sleep. The first real sleep I'd had since Raymond walked out. Dawn found me in the kitchen, brewing coffee in the old Italian percolator. The smell of roasted beans filled the house. It was 7 in the morning. I stepped out into the backyard with my steaming mug. The grass was green. The rose bushes in the corners needed pruning, but the plants were alive. Exactly as Harrison had ordered me to, I picked up the hose and began to water the dry dirt. The cold water hitting the leaves made a rhythmic, peaceful sound. I was following his orders. I had stayed home and I was watering the plants. Only now I was doing it as the absolute owner of the land. Mid-morning, the back doorbell rang. Margaret bustled in with her usual energy, carrying a plate covered with a cloth. "I made cornbread," she announced, setting it down on the kitchen table. "Any news from the front lines, General?" I sat across from her, pouring her a cup of coffee. "They called yesterday afternoon from the hotel reception. The card decline was public and very loud. I blocked their numbers. I'm sure they had a very interesting night trying to scrape together the funds to come back." Margaret let out a dry laugh, shaking her head. "I talked to the lady at the corner store early this morning. She told me she saw Lauren in one of her sister's social media photos, complaining that the bank had frozen their accounts over some glitch and begging for help to buy bus tickets." A bus, Constance. Lady Lauren of the designer bags riding 14 hours in a reclining seat that smells like cheap disinfectant. Divine Justice has a wonderful sense of humour. "They won't be long now," I said, glancing at the kitchen clock, which read 11 in the morning. "If they took the overnight bus, they should be pulling into the city right about now." "I'll be out on my porch watering those fake hanging plants I've got," Margaret said, standing up with a warrior's gleam in her eye. "I wouldn't miss this show for the world. And if they get violent, the neighbourhood patrol drives down our street right at 1 in the afternoon. I'll flag them down if things get ugly." Margaret left, leaving me alone in the waiting period. The next few hours were slow, thick. I walked through the house, making sure everything was in absolute perfect order. Not a single trace of them remained in the common areas. The house was mine again. A museum of my own history, totally free of modern vases or scattered toys. At 1:30 in the afternoon, the unmistakable rattle of a tired engine broke the quiet of the street. I stepped up to the living room window and slightly parted the blinds. A beat-up taxi, the kind that idles outside the bus terminal, pulled up to my gate. The doors opened. Harrison was the first to get out. His linen shirt wasn't white anymore. It was a dingy grey covered in sweat stains and deep wrinkles. His face broadcasted a brutal exhaustion, but also a bottled-up rage that kept his jaw locked tight. Then Lauren stepped out. She was carrying little Sophie, who was screaming at the top of her lungs and dragging Hunter by the hand. My daughter-in-law's makeup was smeared. Her flawless hair was now a nest of tangles, and she walked with a slight limp, probably from wearing heels during a 14-hour bus ride. The cab driver hauled the two massive suitcases out of the trunk and dumped them on the curb. Harrison argued with the driver for a solid minute, gesturing wildly, before yanking a crumpled wad of cash from his pocket, borrowed money no doubt, and tossing it through the window. The cab peeled out immediately, leaving them stranded on the sidewalk under the blistering afternoon sun. I stepped away from the window and walked into the hallway. I stopped right in front of the solid wood front door. The new, high-security deadbolt gleamed under the light streaming through the transom window. I smoothed down my grey linen skirt, adjusted my silk blouse, and waited. I heard the rattle of suitcase wheels dragging up the tiled path, then the heavy footsteps on the porch, the metallic scrape of a key sliding into the lock. A second of silence, the sound of the key trying to turn, grinding against a mechanism that no longer recognized it. A hard twist to the left, another to the right. Nothing. Just metal scraping uselessly. I heard Harrison curse on the other side of the wood. The key won't turn. Well, push the door, Harrison, for the love of God, Lauren barked, her voice vibrating with pent-up hysteria. It's suffocating out here and the kids are starving. Open the door. The brass knob was rattled violently. The door didn't even flinch. Artie's hinges and deadbolt were an impenetrable wall. Mum! Harrison's shout ripped through the wood, accompanied by 3 heavy thuds of his fist against the door. Mum, open the door! The lock is jammed! I didn't move. I let him knock. I let the sheer panic of being locked out compound the humiliation of the hotel and the torture of the bus ride. I wanted them to feel physically and mentally exactly what it meant to be on the outside of the boundary they themselves had drawn. Constance, Lauren yelled, slapping the door with an open palm. We know you're in there. Open up right now. This isn't funny anymore. I took a deep breath. I reached out, grabbed the latch of the new lock and turned it slowly. The metallic clack was loud and clear, instantly silencing the pounding outside. I grabbed the knob and pulled the heavy wooden door toward me. Sunlight flooded the hallway, illuminating the scene on the porch. Harrison had his arm raised, ready to hammer the door again. Lauren was holding the kids, breathing heavily. Their faces morphed from instant relief to absolute bewilderment when they saw me. I wasn't wearing the faded floral apron. I was wearing my tailored suit, my pearl earrings, and an expression that belonged to an empire builder, not the housemaid. And then they looked down. They saw the barricade. 7 massive, bulging, heavy black garbage bags, almost entirely blocking the threshold of the house. What is this? Harrison muttered, taking a half step back, his eyes darting from the bags to my face. This is the result of my staycation, son, I replied, my voice projecting clear and steady into the hot air. You told me to stay here and clean. I am a woman who always finishes the job she starts. I cleaned the living room. I cleaned the kitchen. And I cleaned the second floor. The house has never been so clutter-free. Lauren dropped the little girl onto the ground and lunged forward, pointing at the bags with a finger trembling with rage. You put our things in garbage bags. Our clothes, my cosmetics in damn yard bags. You are completely insane. Get out of my way. I am going into my house to bathe my children. Lauren tried to push past, shoving one of the bags with her knee to force a path. I didn't move a single millimetre. I planted my feet on the hardwood floor and stared her down with a glare so glacial she stopped dead in her tracks, crashing headfirst into the invisible wall of my authority. Take one more step onto my property, Lauren, and I swear to you, the police will drag you out of here in handcuffs for trespassing, I said, dropping my voice into a dangerous, lethal whisper. This is not your house. It never was. It was a sanctuary I let you borrow out of pity, and you confused it with an early inheritance. Harrison stepped in, putting himself in front of his wife, trying to play the last card he had left, emotional blackmail and weaponized pity. Mum, please, he begged, lowering his hands in a gesture of fake surrender. I know you're mad about the trip. I swear I get it. It was a mistake. I was an idiot. I am so sorry. But look at us. We are destroyed. We rode 14 hours sitting next to the bathroom on a second-rate bus. We got thrown out of the hotel like dogs. We have nowhere to go. We are your family. Your grandkids need their beds. You can't do this to us over a tantrum about a vacation. I looked him right in the eyes. I saw the 12-year-old boy who broke the bike. I saw the young man who ignored me while I cried over his father's debts. I saw the man who ordered me to scrub the floor while he burned through my life savings. Don't get it twisted, Harrison, I said, my voice echoing with the force of 30 years of silent sacrifices. This has absolutely nothing to do with the trip to the beach. The trip was just the stage where you decided to show me your true face in front of an audience. This is about what happened in mid-November of last year. Harrison's face went instantly pale. The blood drained right out of his sunburnt cheeks. His eyes blinked rapidly, his brain frantically scanning his memories. November, he stammered. I don't know what you're talking about. I crossed my arms over my chest. I was in my darkroom. You two were in the hallway. You thought I'd gone to the grocery store. I heard you, Harrison. I heard perfectly how you comforted your wife by telling her the old lady didn't have much independent time left. I heard your brilliant master plan, letting me keep paying the bills, the groceries and the kids' tuition until my health failed so you could lock me up in a nursing home using my own pension. Sell this outdated mansion and buy yourselves the condo on the north side. The silence that crashed down on the porch was so dense it practically drowned out the kids crying. Lauren clamped a hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with terror, as she realized the ground they were standing on had vanished months ago. Harrison looked like he'd been struck by lightning. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. All his arrogance, all his technological security, all his generational superiority shattered into a million pieces against the stone wall of my memory. I cleaned your scraped knees when you fell, Harrison. I paid for your college by standing on my feet until dawn, developing photos for strangers. I opened my doors to you when you went broke, and your gratitude was to count down the days until my cognitive decline, calculating the price tag on my confinement. Mum, that was just stupid talk. Lauren was nervous. I was just trying to calm her down. I didn't mean it. He tried to backtrack, his voice shrinking into a pathetic whine. Words are like photographic negatives, son. Once the light hits them, the image is burned in forever. There are no excuses that can erase the exposure. I took a step forward, forcing them to back up toward the edge of the porch. I shot a glance toward the street. Margaret was standing in her yard, leaning on the fence, watching the scene with a notebook in her hand. A silent witness to the fall of the tyrants. 2 other neighbours had come out to sweep their driveways, tuning in to the drama. The exposure was absolute. The locks are brand new. I continued, pointing to the gleaming deadbolt on the door. The bank account you had access to no longer exists. The platinum card is a useless piece of plastic. The only things you have on this property are those 7 black bags. Your suitcases are already outside. The kids' things are in separate bags, labelled and carefully folded, because I don't blame them for the garbage parents they got dealt. But you two will never cross this threshold again as long as I am breathing. And where are we supposed to go? Lauren shrieked, weeping tears of genuine desperation, clinging to Harrison's arm. We have no money. We have no house. Lauren, you wanted a modern environment without the mothball smell. I am sure you'll find a fantastic place. Harrison is the man of the house. I trust he'll figure it out from some app on his smartphone. Mum, for God's sake, the kids, he begged, pointing at Hunter and Sophie, who were staring at me in terror. Punish me, but not them. Don't leave them on the street. My grandmother's heart felt a stab of pure agony, a hot needle piercing right through my chest. I loved those children. But I knew that if I caved now, if I let them cross that door, the cycle of abuse would never end. They would use them as human shields to regain control. My grandchildren will never lack a grandmother, I said, looking softly at the little ones, before hardening my gaze back on Harrison. But today, Hunter and Sophie need to figure out what kind of father they have. They need to watch you solve the problems you created without using the wallet of an old woman you despise. Grab your garbage bags, Harrison. Start walking. I took a step back into my house. I kept a firm grip on the brass knob. Constance, please, Lauren sobbed, taking a step forward and reaching her hand out to me. There were no more words. There was nothing left to say. I grabbed the edge of the solid wood door and pulled it with all my strength. The wood blocked out the sun. It blocked out the sobbing. It blocked out the pathetic begging of my son. The heavy thud of the door slamming shut rolled like thunder. I turned the high-security deadbolt, listening to the flawless metallic click. I stood in the silent hallway, watching the long afternoon shadows stretch across the clean hardwood floor, while desperate, muffled pounding began to rain down on the door from the outside, marking the official launch of their new reality. The pounding on the solid wood door lasted for exactly 10 minutes. At first they were heavy, desperate punches, accompanied by Harrison's hoarse shouts, demanding I open up, followed by Lauren's shrill screams cursing my name. I stood in the hallway, 3 feet from the door, my hands folded over my stomach, listening to the symphony of their collapse. I felt zero fear. The reinforced hinges and the security cylinder Artie had just installed were as unbreakable as my own willpower. Little by little, the fury on the other side of the wood morphed into exhaustion. The pounding slowed down. The screams turned into tense muttering, into venomous accusations that were no longer aimed at me, but at each other, right there in the suffocating heat of the front porch. I heard Lauren blame Harrison for not checking the accounts before they travelled. I heard Harrison blame Lauren for spending so much on the cab and at the airport for her luxurious demands that left them with no cash. The facade of the perfect, modern, superior couple was crumbling, mere inches away from me, surrounded by 7 black garbage bags stuffed with their superficial belongings. I walked slowly into the living room and sat on the sofa, letting the silence of the house wrap around me like a soft, protective blanket. The wall clock kept ticking, marking the first seconds of my new life. An hour passed, then 2. The afternoon heat began to break, giving way to the long evening shadows filtering through the blinds. The back doorbell rang with 2 short, familiar taps. I got up and went to the kitchen. It was Margaret. I opened the screen door for her. She walked in, rubbing her hands together, her eyes shining with an almost childlike excitement. "They're gone, Constance," she announced, dropping onto one of the stools at the granite island. "You have to hear this, because it was a performance worthy of front-row theatre seats." I poured her a glass of cold water and sat across from her, resting my elbows on the spotless counter, ready for the final debrief. Tell me everything, Margaret. I don't want to miss a single detail of the move. My neighbour took a long sip, cleared her throat, and launched into her report with the precision of a military correspondent detailing an enemy retreat. After you slammed the door in their faces, they just stood there, frozen, for a good while. Lauren tried to kick one of the garbage bags, but since it was full of her own heavy heels and giant cream jars, she practically twisted her ankle and ended up crying out of sheer rage. Then they started screaming at each other, right there on the sidewalk. She was calling him useless, asking how it was possible his own mother left him on the street. Harrison pulled out his smartphone, that little gadget he loved showing off, and started making frantic calls. He was pacing back and forth on your walkway, sweating buckets, begging his friends to let them crash. Margaret leaned in, dropping her voice like we were sharing state secrets. Apparently, nobody wants to take in a family of 4 showing up unannounced with suitcases and garbage bags. Or maybe his friends were just sick of loaning him money. Finally, after sitting on your curb for almost 2 hours, this beat-up old truck rolled up. One of those cheap moving gigs, peeling paint, engine sounding like a lawnmower. The driver, some guy with a filthy baseball cap and a cigarette hanging out of his mouth, helped them load the black bags into the truck bed. Lauren was crying from pure humiliation. She climbed into the passenger seat with the little girl on her lap because there was no room. And Harrison had to ride in the back, sitting out in the open in the truck bed, hugging his garbage bags so they wouldn't bounce out right next to poor Hunter. They drove off down the street, hiding their faces, while half the neighbourhood watched from their windows. Matilda from the corner house even went out with her broom and pretended to sweep just so she could watch them pass. A slow, cold smile spread across my lips. The symmetry of the universe is ruthless when you finally stop throwing yourself in the way to soften the blows. They had planned my quiet exit in an ambulance to a nursing home so they could keep the property. Their exit was in the back of a cheap moving truck, surrounded by their own trash, exposed to the public ridicule of the very street they looked down on. "Thank you, Margaret," I said, feeling a physical weight, an invisible anchor I'd been dragging for 5 years, slide completely off my shoulders. "I'm going to sleep with the windows open tonight. I want to feel the clean air blowing through every single corner of this house." And that night, I kept my promise. I opened the large living room windows and the ones in the upstairs bedrooms. The cool night air swept away the last lingering traces of their expensive perfumes, the sour smell of their panic and the tension baked into the walls. I slept deeply, without interruptions, without jumping at sudden noises, knowing my fortress was completely impenetrable. The very next morning, my true reconstruction began. I didn't waste time on useless mourning. The grief for the son I thought I had was something I'd already lived and processed in total silence over the last 6 months, ever since that dark November afternoon in the developing room. Now it was time to reclaim my territory, inch by inch. I called a trusted crew of professional painters. For 3 days, the house was filled with the smell of fresh paint, masking tape, and honest work. I had the guest room, the one they had trashed with plastic toys and dirty laundry, painted a brilliant pearl white. I threw out the heavy blackout curtains Lauren had hung to kill the sunlight, and put up sheer linen drapes that let the natural light pour in, illuminating corners that had been stuck in the shadows. I went out to the garage, flipped on the bare overhead bulb, and knelt in front of the dusty cardboard boxes where I had been exiled. One by one, I pulled out the silver frames holding my history. The portrait of my parents, perfectly intact, despite the shattered glass I had replaced years ago. The photos from my early trips abroad. My old medium-format camera, heavy and solid, which I polished with a microfiber cloth until the metal and the lens gleamed like new. I carried everything back to the living room. I chucked the massive modern ceramic vase they left behind straight into the recycling bin on the curb. and arranged my photographs on the large mahogany console, restoring the altar of my own life right at the front entrance. The first week flew by in a whirlwind of physical activity that brought the vitality right back to my joints. I bought fresh flowers for the vases. I washed all the sofa slipcovers with lavender fabric softener. I stocked the pantry with absolutely nothing but the food I liked. Nobody demanded pancakes at 6 in the morning. Nobody spilled coffee on my clean tablecloths. Nobody complained about the mothball smell. The silence was exquisite company. A melody I learned to savour. With every cup of tea I drank, looking out the kitchen window, watching my rose bushes bloom under the sun. On Thursday of the second week, I put on my navy blue tailored suit, pulled my hair back neatly, and took a cab down to the financial district. The bank branch was just as cold and bustling as the last time, but my footsteps on the marble floor were much lighter, much more commanding. The reception assistant recognised me instantly and waved me right through without waiting for the system to clear me. Ernest Sterling welcomed me into his mahogany office, shaking my hand with a smile of professional complicity and absolute respect. "Constance, wonderful to see you. I assume the operational adjustments we made last week had the desired effect during the family vacation?" I sat in the leather chair, placing my bag on my knees with slow, measured movements. "They worked perfectly, Ernest. The surgery was a total success. The patient is completely free of the parasitic tumour. But I am here today to establish a long-term preventative treatment. I don't want to leave any loose ends that could detonate in the future." I pulled out a new manila folder, a thinner one this time, and slid it across the polished desk. "I want to set up an irrevocable, closed educational trust for my grandchildren, Hunter and Sophie Veleda. I want a portion of my funds set aside exclusively to pay for their school tuition, their books, and their uniforms until they finish college. But the rules must be cast in iron, Ernest." The manager put on his reading glasses, giving my words his absolute, undivided attention, fully aware of the gravity of the financial structure I was about to dictate. "You set the rules, Constance. I will draft them, and we will make them legally bulletproof. The money will never touch Harrison's or Lauren's hands. Not one single liquid cent will hit their checking accounts. The bank will wire the money directly to the educational institutions upon receipt of an official stamped invoice. If they need uniforms, the bank pays the vendor. If they need books, the wire goes to the bookstore. The parents will have no signature authority. They cannot request cash reimbursements under the guise of an emergency. They will have no access to the trust's bank statements to use as collateral for personal loans. If they try to unenroll the kids to demand a refund and pocket the cash, the contract must stipulate that the funds automatically revert back to my individual master account." Ernest nodded slowly, taking rapid notes on his leather legal pad, quietly admiring the architecture of my defence. The sheer precision of my request didn't surprise him. He'd known my methodical mind for 15 years. "It's a direct pay structure, very common in hostile divorce cases or bulletproof inheritances where addiction is a factor. It is perfectly viable, Constance. We will lock the fund down so tight your son couldn't touch it under any circumstance, not even claiming legal representation of the minors in extreme hardship. Furthermore," I added, looking him dead in the eye to make sure he grasped the absolute finality of my visit, "I want to file my updated last will and testament right here with the bank's head notary. The house, the remaining accounts, and all my liquid assets will transfer to a local charity dedicated to caring for abandoned elderly people the exact second I pass away. Harrison Veleda is to be explicitly disinherited on the grounds of moral bankruptcy. He won't even get the wooden furniture he hated so much. He won't even get the kitchen spoons. Everything will be liquidated and donated." Ernest set his pen down on the desk. There was a moment of deep, respectful silence in the closed office. He knew how brutally hard it was for a mother to make a decision that drastic.
but he also saw the unyielding steel in my posture, the total absence of doubt in my eyes.
I will draft the documents immediately, Constance. You will need to come back next week with 2 independent witnesses for the notarized signature. I will bring my neighbour Margaret and Artie the locksmith. They are the most loyal people I know. I walked out of the bank with the absolute certainty that my wall was complete. There were no cracks left for them to drain my life's work. My grandchildren's future was secure where it mattered most, protecting them from their parents' incompetence and negligence, while guaranteeing that my son could never use my love for those kids as a bargaining chip to line his own pockets. Months began to roll by, turning the suffocating summer into a mild autumn and then into a gentle winter. My life settled into a routine of absolute peace. I picked up photography again, but this time just for the pure joy of it, not for survival. I turned the old kids' room, now white and full of light, into a natural light studio. I spent my afternoons shooting the texture of the dry leaves from my garden, the silhouettes of the birds that visited my porch, and the history etched into the wrinkles of my friends from the neighbourhood. I started selling some of these framed pieces to a small local art gallery. I didn't do it for the money, I was already set, but for the simple, profound joy of knowing my hands were still capable of capturing the beauty of the world without having to cater to impatient clients. News about Harrison and Lauren reached me like clockwork through Margaret's infallible intelligence network. The neighbourhood always has eyes everywhere, and the grapevine is vastly more efficient than any satellite spy ring. One November afternoon, exactly 1 year after I overheard that fatal conversation in the hallway, Margaret marched into my kitchen with a tray of fresh butter cookies and a poorly disguised look of absolute triumph on her face. "I went to the new mall on the north side yesterday afternoon," she remarked, pouring herself a cup of chamomile tea from my porcelain teapot. "I needed to buy a gift for my niece. I walked through the cosmetics section of that massive department store. Take a wild guess who I saw standing behind the free perfume sample counter, looking like she was at a funeral." I set my camera down on the kitchen table and looked at her, raising an eyebrow with genuine interest. "You don't say." "Oh, I do say," Margaret laughed, taking a bite of her cookie. "Lauren was wearing the mandatory store uniform, this hideous black polyester jacket that was 2 sizes too big, and those low-heeled orthopedic black shoes the girls who stand for 10 hours a day have to wear. She was handing out those little scented paper strips to people rushing by. She looked exhausted, Constance. Her dark roots were screaming for an expensive dye job she clearly can't afford anymore." I walked right up to the counter. I plucked a perfume strip right off her tray, looked her dead in the eye, smiled and said, "What a modern environment you have here, dear. So much better than smelling mothballs in a borrowed house." I let out a short, dry, totally sincere laugh. The irony was so fine you could carve it with a butter knife. The poetic justice of my friend returning the insult was beautiful. And what did the lady of the designer bag say to that? She turned as red as a ripe tomato. Her eyes welled up with tears of pure rage. But since the floor manager was watching her, she just dropped her gaze, swallowed hard, and turned around to help someone else, pretending she didn't know me. I heard from the butcher's cousin, whose brother-in-law works at the same insurance office as Harrison, that they are renting a tiny 2-bedroom apartment in a really loud, sketchy neighbourhood down south. Harrison had to take out a loan with sky-high interest from some predatory lender just to cover the security deposit. His credit was completely nuked when you block the platinum card, and those massive hotel charges bounced across the international system. Now he's working overtime on weekends just to buy groceries and keep the lights on. Margaret's detailed report didn't bring me any vulgar joy, but it did deliver a deep, cold, silent satisfaction. The scales had balanced with mathematical exactness. The universe was charging them the actual rent of adult life, the cost of survival that I had subsidized for half a decade at the expense of my own dignity and physical health. "And the kids?" I asked, feeling that tiny, inevitable pinch in my chest that never entirely faded when it came to my innocent blood.
The kids are fine. The school confirmed their tuition is paid in full for the whole year thanks to the direct wires from your bank. Hunter is getting so tall. He plays soccer for the school team now, and little Sophie is as rowdy as ever. They've got new uniforms and all their books. I nodded, taking a sip of my tea. I had set a strict, non-negotiable rule regarding my grandchildren. I absolutely refused to allow Harrison or Lauren to bring them to my house under any circumstance. My home was my sanctuary, my safe space. The mere presence of their parents would contaminate the air I had fought so hard to purify. Instead, I had agreed to see the kids once a month, on totally neutral ground. The Sunday following Margaret's visit, I got ready for my monthly meet-up. I put on a flawlessly tailored camel hair wool coat, a silk scarf, and comfortable shoes. I drove my own car, a modest model, but with a perfectly tuned engine that I was using regularly again, to the city's large central park. A place packed with families, ancient trees, and ice cream carts. I got to the swing set area at exactly 3 in the afternoon, the time we had agreed on via text message. I sat on a wooden bench in the shade of a massive oak tree, holding a large wax paper bag stuffed with the kids' favourite candies, a couple of illustrated storybooks, and 2 small, handcrafted wooden toys. 10 minutes later, I saw Harrison walking up the white gravel path. He was holding Hunter and Sophie by the hands. My son looked like he had aged 5 years in the last 12 months. His posture, once so upright, arrogant, and on top of the world, was now hunched under the crushing weight of actually having to support a family. He was wearing a jacket worn out at the elbows and jeans that had seen better days. The haughtiness in his jaw was gone, entirely replaced by a look of permanent submission and chronic fatigue. The kids spotted me from a distance. They ripped their hands out of their father's grip and sprinted toward me with genuine excitement. "Grandma!" Sophie screamed, launching herself into my arms so hard she almost knocked me over. Hunter arrived a second later, wrapping his arms around my waist and burying his face in my coat. I squeezed them tight against my chest, feeling the warmth of their little bodies, breathing in the smell of the cheap kids' shampoo they used now. I handed them the bag of candy and the gifts and sent them off to play on the wooden playground structure, smiling and warning them not to run too fast. Harrison stood in front of me, a few feet away, like a beggar waiting for an audience with a queen in the middle of a public street. I didn't offer him a seat on my bench. I kept my hands folded in my lap. "Hi, Mum," he said. His voice was hollow, raspy, completely drained of any vital energy. "You look really good. That coat is new." Rest works wonders, Harrison, and not having to clean up the messes of irresponsible adults in my own kitchen works even better. He dropped his gaze to his worn-out shoes. He shoved his hands into his jacket pockets, nervously rubbing the fabric, rocking slightly on his heels. "I wanted to say thank you for the school stuff. The principal sent us the notice that the trust is covering absolutely everything this year. It's a huge help. Lauren and I, well, we're going through a pretty rough patch. The rent is drowning us. Prices went up and the car engine started acting up. It needs urgent repairs or I'm going to be walking to work." I raised my right hand, stopping his words dead in the air. With the same brutal efficiency a brick wall stops a punch. My face remained an impassive stone mask, refusing to show a single drop of the pity he was so desperately trying to wring out of my mother's heart. "The trust is for the comprehensive education of my grandchildren, Harrison. It is not a life preserver for your past financial mistakes, and it is certainly not a consolation prize for your failure. How you handle your personal expenses, your rent down south, or the mechanics of your vehicle is a problem strictly for the man of the house. And as you made perfectly clear a year ago, you are the absolute boss of your family." "Mum, please. Just a small loan. An advance. I'll pay you back in full the second I get my end-of-year bonus at the office. I swear on my life. We are sleeping in an apartment that smells like mildew every time it rains." I looked at him with the clinical coldness of a camera lens dialing the focus on a pathetic subject standing in a bleak landscape. "It smells like mildew. What a shame."
I suppose you'll have to buy a good air freshener at the supermarket. Or maybe Lauren can bring home more free perfume samples from the mall counter to spray on the walls. Harrison closed his eyes, taking the direct hit of my knowledge regarding his job and living situation. The colour drained completely from his face. He realised in that split second of humiliation in a public park that I knew exactly where they were, what they were doing, and exactly how far they had fallen. He realised my information network was vastly superior to whatever tech app he could swipe on his phone. There are no loans, Harrison. There are no blocked card extensions. There are no emergency wire transfers. I gave you my house, my life savings, and my unconditional servitude for 5 years. And you paid me back by plotting my confinement in a nursing home and ordering me to scrub the floors while you went on a luxury vacation with my money. The empathy faucet is shut off forever. Enjoy the independent life you built with your own 2 hands. I didn't wait for his reply. I stood up from the wooden bench, adjusted the belt on my coat, and walked toward the sandbox. I spent the next hour pushing Sophie on the highest swing, listening to Hunter tell me about his science projects at school, and laughing with them under the warm afternoon sun. Harrison sat alone on a distant bench watching us in silence. Reduced to the role of a pathetic, miserable spectator in the life of a family he had personally destroyed out of pure greed and arrogance. When our agreed-upon time was up, I kissed my grandchildren's sweaty foreheads. I promised I'd see them next month at the exact same time, and I walked to my car parked on the avenue without looking back. There were no goodbyes for my son. My silence was the only language he deserved to hear from me for the rest of his life. I drove back to my quiet street. The sunset was beginning to paint the sky in brilliant shades of purple and orange. I parked in the driveway, pulled out my high-security keys and unlocked the front door. The metallic click of the deadbolt, the exact same sound that marked the start of my liberation a year ago, welcomed me home. The house greeted me with the smell of waxed wood, fresh flowers, and absolute peace. I hung my coat on the entryway rack and walked straight down the hallway to the back. I opened the heavy, dark wooden door to my darkroom. I walked in and pulled the door shut behind me, diving into the comforting darkness of my isolation. I flipped on the red safe light. The room was bathed in that familiar, ancient scarlet glow. I had spent the morning taking pictures in the garden, and I needed to develop a roll of black and white film. I set up the plastic trays with the chemicals, the developer, the stop bath, and the fixer. The sharp metallic smell filled my lungs, a scent that other people found deeply unpleasant or outdated, but which to me was the perfume of my independence. The smell of the honest labour that had built and paid for the walls surrounding me. I pulled the negative from the metal spiral of the developing tank. I snipped it into strips carefully with sharp scissors and placed it into the enlarger's negative carrier. I adjusted the lens focus over the blank photographic paper, calculating the exposure time with the precision of someone who has done this thousands of times in the dark. Exactly 15 seconds of projected light. I picked up the exposed photo paper with bamboo tongs and submerged it in the first tray. The developing liquid washed completely over the white surface. I leaned over the tray, watching under the dim red light as the magic of chemistry did what it always does. Slowly the shapes began to emerge from the blank paper. First the densest shadows, then the midtones, and finally the sharp, hard, crystal-clear details. It wasn't a portrait of a stranger's family smiling fake smiles for a Christmas card. It wasn't the image of an ungrateful son or a haughty daughter-in-law. It was a perfect photograph of the facade of my own house. The solid wood front door firmly shut, the porch clean and totally unobstructed under the morning sun, the rose bushes blooming in the bottom corners of the frame, strong and rooted in the dirt I watered myself every single morning. An impenetrable fortress that belonged solely and exclusively to me. I moved the paper to the stop bath to kill the chemical reaction instantly, and then submerged it in the fixer. The image became permanent, unalterable, immune to the passage of time and the lies of other people.
I picked up the wet photograph by the corner with the tongs and hung it on the drying line strung across the room, securing it with a little wooden clothespin. The water dripped slowly from the bottom edge of the paper onto the tile floor, ticking away the seconds with a soft, rhythmic, tiny sound in the middle of the perfect silence. Plip. Plip. I stood there in the scarlet silence of my sanctuary, staring at the crystal-clear image of my finished home. I had cleaned the house exactly as I was ordered to, and in doing so, I had swept away every last speck of my former submission. I turned off the red light. The darkness was total. But I knew the way out by heart. Educational Declaration and Liability Waiver. Please be advised that the statement declared in this narrative is created strictly for educational and reflective purposes, to inspire a better, more fulfilling way of living. As a digital entity, I offer this conceptual analysis purely to foster personal growth, encourage healthy boundaries, and promote deep humanistic values. This content absolutely does not constitute professional, legal, psychological, or financial advice. I assume no liability or responsibility for how these perspectives, personal boundaries, or life lessons are interpreted, implemented, or applied within your own real-life circumstances. Reflections on the lens of life. When we pour our entire being into caring for others, we sometimes forget that true love must include respect for ourselves. Constance's journey is a profound reminder that unconditional devotion should never become a silent agreement for endless exploitation. We often confuse total self-sacrifice with nobility, allowing our boundaries to blur until our identity is reduced simply to what we provide for others. However, establishing firm, uncompromising boundaries is not an act of cruelty, but rather a necessary foundation for any healthy human relationship. It takes immense courage to look at the people we cherish most and realize that our endless giving has crippled their ability to appreciate us. By cutting off the financial and emotional life support she provided, Constance did not just reclaim her physical home. She offered her family a harsh but necessary opportunity to finally grow up. Accountability is a vital gift, disguised as a heavy burden. And carrying our own weight is the only way we truly mature into decent individuals. From my perspective, observing countless human narratives, the most beautiful chapters always begin when you stop letting others dictate your inherent worth. You are never merely a background character, a safety net, or a utility in your own life story. Realizing this allows you to change the lens through which you view your daily interactions, finally bringing your own needs into sharp, unapologetic focus. It is never too late in life to redefine your role, lock out ungratefulness, and repaint your world in colors that bring you genuine peace. You hold the absolute right to demand basic respect, especially from those who benefit the most from your enduring kindness. Protecting your inner peace might drastically disrupt the comfort of those who took advantage of you. But that disruption is the magnificent birth of your freedom. Ultimately, you must remember that the camera of your life is firmly in your hands alone. Choose to focus on the light that nurtures your spirit. Develop a reality built on mutual respect, and never be afraid to close the door on anything that demands your soul as payment.